Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here, coming to you from New York City, of course. Looks like I'm in a green forest. I'm in Central Park. It's about the only place you can go to find any little spot without people. Ironies, ironies. Here's another irony for you. Mr. Cropper has books and stuff behind him at all times when he lives out in hillbilly country. But then he moves to New York City and his backdrop becomes greenery and plants. Very odd. Well, let's continue with Christopher Hitchens. Why Orwell Matters might not be worth reading once you've listened to my videos on it. Let's see, we were on page 62. The midnight of the century. What was the midnight of the century? This is just a sentence. I'm going to tell you what it is in just a second. And then we're on to the next point. The midnight of the century. What's the darkest hour of the entire century? Was it Hitler coming to power in 33, Stalin coming to power in 28, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand in 1914 maybe. He says that the midnight of the century was the clasping of hands between Hitler and Stalin, the Hitler and Stalin pact. The worst point in the century, at least up till then. Then you might say the midnight of the century. I mean, in retrospect, we got to choose one or the other, I guess. But one of the options would be the dropping of the atomic bomb, or was that a flash of light and hope for humanity? Maybe true that it was a flash of hope for humanity, a beacon in a dark realm of history. Sure, the 20th century was really, really bad, but at least they invented the nuclear weapon, you know, during that time period. You know, it's a plausible belief. Okay, on page 65, he says, and it doesn't matter what he's talking about, specifically Czechoslovakia, Poland, Spain, he says the painful question of small nationalities. Let me let an ambulance go by. The painful question of small nationalities, he says, within the context of Czechoslovakia and Poland and such. Now, that's one of my disagreements with Hitchens is, why are small nationalities so important? Why are nationalities important at all? I'm going to make a video when I get done with this on the first junto, my attempt at first junto here in New York City. I found out there's a thing called the NYC Junto Club, which I'm going to start attending. But I tried to have a junto, and there were two of us. Then we went to a bar called the Thirsty Scholar, and I'll do a video on what happened there, because we met a guy who believed his nationality was Scottish, not British. He was not British. Don't call him British. He's Scottish. And I was like, whatever. You're British. I've seen a map. I know that you are from Britain. Okay. The question of small nationalities, I think, has to be one of Hitchens' major shortcomings. He's got it wrong in economics, politics, metaphysics, epistemology, but he's a good polemicist. Why are small nationalities important? They're not. Individual rights are important. The smallest minority of all is not, as he says, what is it? What's up in the north of Iraq? Kurds? Yeah, I think the Kurds. He says the Kurds are the smallest nationality on earth without their own state. Well, boo frickin' who? What does it matter? Protection of individual rights is the question, not which race is in charge of which patch of soil. Alright. Now he talks about the Poles and how Poland has been invaded again and again and again, and it was carved up by Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia, and he says, this nation of 30 million deserves its independence in any world where national sovereignty is possible. National sovereignty. Why national sovereignty? What's important about it? Why not have the 30 million people in a state that protects their rights instead of a state that is Polish? He thinks that you can't get more simple than just to say the nation. It's an irreducible primary. There's no simpler structure to break it down into. Once you've got the people's culture and nationality in their region of the planet, their patch of soil defined, that's the definition of that nation. You can't break it down any further. There's no more meaningful depth to it. You know, it's a type of racism. groupism, tribalism, nationalism. That's Hitchens. All right, we're up to page 75 now. He talks about Robert Mugabe. He was elected in 1980. Now, he was in exile for a while, and Chris Hitchens went and interviewed him in exile. He transformed Rhodesia into Zimbabwe and was a foretaste of the later triumph of Nelson Mandela. Well, Mr. Mugabe set up a youth brigade that was named the 21st February Movement in honor of his own birthday, of course. He invited North Korean advisors to train his army. He employed death squad tactics against the democratic opposition, which based itself on Zimbabwe's trade union movement. Thus, when the Daily News began to serialize Animal Farm in June of 2001, nobody needed to have the joke explained to them. So, Animal Farm gets past the censors, gets serialized in a newspaper. Here's this old story written by some guy from England a long time ago, and we're going to offer, a snippet of it each week. Nobody needed to have the joke explained. Napoleon, the scheming and ruthless pig who makes his own birthday a holiday and reserves all the milk and beer for his fellow porcines, was depicted in the paper in the heavily rimmed black spectacles worn by Mr. Mugabe. Wow. Right? Jeffrey Nyarota, the paper's editor-in-chief, remarked that Animal Farm is not only relevant, but pertinent to Zimbabwe. The animals in the book won independence by working together, but in due course some became drunk with power. That's what he had to say about it. Bookshops in the capital city, Harare, could not keep pace with demand for Orwell's classic, which increased when the presses of the Daily News were destroyed by an anti-tank mine of the sort not available to ordinary citizens, but probably available to the government. That's the kind of state these places end up being. Sirens again. That's the kind of state these places end up being, where the government attacks the people, actually attacks the people. Okay, we skipped just a sentence there. In 1998, near the Barcelona waterfront, a rather plebeian square was named Plaça George Orwell. Barcelona, Spain, of course, at a ceremony commissioned by the city's socialist mayor, Pascal Maragall. Socialist mayor. Yeah, that's right. I mean, Orwell was a socialist. He was fighting for socialism against fascism, and he hated what came out to be communism, and he hated dishonesty and so on. Now, this gave me the thought that it must have been a really freaky place to be, Europe in Orwell's time. A really freaky place to be, because the people who were in favor of what was good and right were socialists. The people who were in favor of what was bad and evil were National Socialists, fascists. There was no good to turn to, and Orwell was a socialist for the things he believed in it that were good. And as we'll see, he didn't know very much about America and didn't seem to care to learn too much about it. André Nin, A-N-D-R-E-S, Nin, N-I-N, revered in Catalonia as a great revolutionary, is also available to Catalan school children and students as the translator of Anna Karenina and Crime and Punishment into their once forbidden tongue. How apt that a truly cultured Marxist, tortured and murdered on Stalin's orders, should have upheld Russian literature against the Philistinism of Stalin, as well as having inspired one of his greatest posthumous defeats. Very interesting that he had gone to the work of translating classic Russian literature, Crime and Punishment, Anna Karenina, and so on. And he was a Marxist. He was fighting for Marxism, and he was liquidated by Stalin. He was killed and tortured by Stalin. History's full of ironies, chock full. Now that's the end of chapter 2. We're on to chapter 3, page 80. Orwell seems to have been an advocate for the private ownership of guns. He also preferred the country to the town.